Chunky introduces another big chicken noodle soup. New classic chicken noodle.
Fiber goodness bread is changing all that. Made with pure
Kool-Aid! Kids love my super fruity flavors, and you don't...
Do you remember those everyday grocery items? The ones that barely cost $1 but now feel out of reach? These basics once filled carts without a second thought, keeping meals steady and wallets intact. When did the familiar start feeling so expensive? And what does that say about now? Eggs used to be a default, always in the fridge, always in the budget. You could grab a dozen for less than $1 in the 1980s, and even into the early 2000s they felt affordable. They were breakfast, they were dinner, they were dessert. Scrambled, fried, baked into cakes, or boiled for sandwiches. No one really thought about the price of eggs because they were just there. They were dependable. Now, not so much. Prices have doubled, even tripled, depending on the year and your zip code. It is not unheard of to pay $6 or $7 for a dozen, and that is not even the organic kind. Suddenly, eggs are the kind of item you compare per unit, per store, and per brand. That cheap protein? Not so cheap anymore. You stand in the dairy aisle doing mental math and wondering how something so basic got so expensive, and yet you still buy them. Because you have to. Because they do everything. They are glue for baking, power for breakfast, and comfort in a pan. There was a time when eggs were what you added to stretch the budget. Now they are the thing that might break it. Bacon used to be a Sunday treat, a crisp slice or two beside scrambled eggs and toast. It was greasy, smoky, salty magic, and affordable enough that you could throw it in a sandwich or wrap it around meatloaf without blinking. You bought a pack, you cooked half, and you ate the rest cold out of the fridge when no one was looking. That was the bacon tax. But these days, bacon is practically a luxury meat. A pack that used to cost $2 is now pushing $8 or even $10, and that is for the regular stuff, not the thick-cut, hickory-smoked artisan strips wrapped in gold foil. Grocery shoppers do double takes. Sales on bacon feel like Black Friday. People swap brands, skip it entirely, or portion it like rationed butter in wartime. You can almost hear the sizzling sound in the skillet crying over how much it cost to get there. Still, some refuse to give it up. Because bacon does not just taste good. It feels like something good. It feels like breakfast at home. It feels like comfort. You might buy less, use it slower, or save it for special meals. But deep down, you still crave it. And even at those prices, bacon still sells out. Ground beef was the hero of the grocery cart. You could get a pound for a couple bucks, stretch it into tacos, meatloaf, spaghetti sauce, sloppy joes, or burgers for a family of 5. It was dinner on autopilot. You browned it, seasoned it, and hoped no one noticed how little meat there actually was. And somehow, it worked. Today, ground beef is a budget buster. You are lucky to find a pound under $6, and that is usually the fatty kind. The kind that shrinks in the pan and leaves half a cup of grease behind. You catch yourself eyeing chicken thighs or vegetarian options just to avoid the sticker shock. Even the marked-down meat bins are not what they used to be. And for folks who grew up on Hamburger Helper and Taco Night, that feels like a punch to the gut. Ground beef was supposed to be the cheap stuff. Now it is something you plan for, something you stretch even further. And if you are buying the good kind, grass-fed, lean, organic, you are treating it like filet mignon. We used to shape it into meatballs with our hands. Now we check the price per ounce with our calculators. Funny how a pound of ground beef can weigh so much more now. Peanut butter was never just food, it was a backup plan. A peanut butter sandwich meant you could get through a school day or a late shift without cooking. You could spoon it straight from the jar, smear it on apples, or dip pretzels in it for a quick hit of salty sweet comfort. Jif, Skippy, or the crunchy store brand, you had choices, and they were all cheap. It was the first thing kids learned how to cook. It was the last thing in the cabinet before payday. It was protein when meat was too expensive and comfort when everything else felt too hard. It never needed heating, slicing, or planning. Just a spoon. And for a lot of us, it was the taste of survival with a little sugar on top. Today, one jar costs what 2 used to, sometimes more. The aisle has turned into a display of inflation, with jars climbing over $6, even higher for natural or non-GMO versions. You hold the jar and think, is it really worth it? And the answer is usually yes, because peanut butter still does everything. It still feeds kids. It still lives in lunchboxes and emergency kits. But now, it comes with a mental negotiation. You might skip jelly, you might spoon it slower, but you still buy it. Because peanut butter is still the one food that never let you down. It is just a little harder to afford that loyalty now. Macaroni and cheese in a box was the go-to. It was dinner when you had $3 left, when the fridge was empty, or when you just could not deal with cooking. It was fluorescent orange, creamy if you stirred it right, and ready in 10 minutes. Every kid loved it. Every college student lived on it. You did not need measuring cups, timers, or even much skill. Just a pot, a spoon, and enough water to boil. It made everyone feel like they knew how to cook, even if it came from a box. Leftovers barely existed because no one ever left any. And sometimes the cheese powder was the only bright thing in the kitchen. You could get a box for 30 cents, sometimes less. Now, that same box is creeping past $1 or more. And the deluxe kinds, the ones with real cheese sauce? Forget it. The value meal just got a markup. And that stings because boxed mac and cheese was supposed to be inflation-proof. It was never about gourmet. It was about survival. Now it is in a weird middle zone. Still cheap, but not cheap enough to ignore. Not when you used to buy 5 boxes for the price of 1. And yet it still sits in the pantry. Still shows up when you need it most. Mac and cheese in a box used to be your fallback. Now it is more like your compromise. Store-brand white bread was the simplest thing in the cart. $1 or less, soft enough to squish, bland enough to go with everything. It was peanut butter's best friend, the base for grilled cheese, French toast, and budget BLTs. It tore easily, went stale quickly, but no one cared. It did its job. It was there for bologna and mayonnaise, for butter and cinnamon sugar, for ketchup sandwiches when that was all you had. You could roll it into dough balls, toast it black, or eat it plain during long grocery weeks. It was the lunch you did not pack with pride, but it filled you up. Bread was not about taste, it was about being full. Now that $1 loaf is pushing 2, sometimes 3, and if you want anything beyond plain white, like wheat or multigrain, it climbs even faster. Bread is not supposed to be the item you debate over, but you stand there now looking at unit prices like you are shopping for real estate. And somehow, even the cheap bread has gotten smaller. The slices are thinner, the bags lighter, but the price tags heavier. Still, you need it. Still, it goes in the cart. Because white bread is not just a side, it is the foundation of half your meals. And whether it is 99 cents or $2.99, it is still the bread that holds it all together. Butter used to feel fancy, but it was still affordable. You could pick up a stick for baking or slather it on toast without checking the price tag. It made everything taste better: vegetables, pancakes, popcorn. And it lasted a while. That yellow block lived in your fridge like a quiet workhorse. These days, butter has entered luxury territory. A 4-stick pack that once cost $2 now hovers near $6 or more. And if it says European or grass-fed, forget it. You start budgeting how much butter you use in every recipe. Is it worth it for cookies? Can you get by with margarine? Even restaurants are charging for real butter now as if it is truffle oil. It is frustrating because butter is not optional. It is essential. It is what made bland food better. So now you cut thinner slices, use more oil, or freeze what is left, but deep down, nothing replaces it. Butter is still king, even if it is wearing a price tag now. Ramen noodles were the joke that everyone actually lived on. 10 cents a pack, salt, starch, and survival in a crinkly plastic wrapper. You could boil it, microwave it, or eat it dry like chips. It was the food of college dorms, first apartments, and weeks when the rent was due. Now, ramen costs double, sometimes triple, and that is just for the basic packs. The premium ones with names like Tokyo Tonkotsu or Kimchi Gold, those cost more than a frozen pizza. What used to be a pantry filler now eats into the grocery budget. And sure, it is still cheaper than most meals. But when 10-cent noodles become 50-cent noodles, you notice, especially if you are buying 10 at a time. Ramen was never meant to be fancy. It was supposed to be the thing that never changed. But even that little brick of noodles is not immune anymore. Somehow, even struggle food got expensive. Canned tuna in oil was humble, but reliable. It sat in the back of the cupboard waiting to become tuna salad, a casserole, or a quick sandwich when there was no time or money to spare. A can cost less than $1. You did not overthink it. You just added mayonnaise and moved on. Now those cans are getting smaller while the prices grow. $3 a can for name brand. Even the store brand can sneak past $2 when no one is looking. And that is not even for the kind in water. The kind in oil, once the cheaper, tastier pick, is becoming a premium item. You start checking for sales. You stock up when it is 4 for $5 like it is a luxury you are rationing. Canned tuna used to be about stretching meals. Now it is about stretching dollars. And there is something deeply wrong when the emergency food is no longer affordable. Kool-Aid packets were childhood currency. 10 cents each, maybe 5 if you hit the right store. You tore it open, dumped the powder, added sugar and water, and suddenly had a whole pitcher of sweet neon liquid that dyed your tongue for hours. It was more than a drink. It was a rite of passage. Now those little envelopes are hitting 30, 40, even 50 cents. And the price of sugar? Do not even get started. Suddenly, a jug of homemade Kool-Aid is almost as expensive as buying soda. You stand in the aisle holding the cherry packet, wondering when this became math. The flavor names are still silly. The mascot is still busting through walls in your memory. But the magic has faded under the price hikes. Kool-Aid used to mean summer, laughter, and sticky plastic cups on the porch. Now it just makes you wonder how even powdered sugar water got caught up in inflation. Instant mashed potatoes used to be the cheapest way to fake real comfort. Just add water, maybe some butter, and suddenly you had a side dish that looked like dinner came together on purpose. They were shelf-stable, family-sized, and cheap. $1 or less for a box that lasted weeks. Now those same boxes are $2 or $3, and the portion sizes have somehow shrunk while the price tags grew. Even store brands have edged up into "wait, what?" territory. And that is not even counting the loaded kinds with cheese or bacon flavoring. They are practically deluxe now. For people who used to grab 3 boxes without blinking, that is a shift. It means thinking twice about something you once relied on. Something that filled your plate when there was not much else to serve. Sure, they are still fast, still easy, still kind of taste like cardboard fluff, but the good kind. But now they are a backup plan with a budget. Even fake potatoes are not cheap anymore. Canned ravioli and spaghetti were never fancy, but they were hot and filling. Open a can, dump it in a pot or microwave, and you had a hot meal in minutes. Kids loved it. Adults tolerated it. And the price, under $1, was the real selling point. Now, a single can can hit over $2, and the multi-packs that used to be budget savers now look like gourmet bundles. Even the off-brands have started creeping up. You buy less. You stockpile on sale. You debate whether lukewarm pasta with mystery meat is really worth that much. But you also remember the comfort. The weird satisfaction of biting into one of those soft, sauce-filled pockets. The sauce was never great, but it was familiar. Now it feels like even childhood food nostalgia comes with a price tag. You used to joke about canned pasta. Now it is laughing back. Cream of mushroom soup used to be the unsung hero of 1,000 casseroles. It was not something you ate on its own, but it was the base of every budget recipe your mom made from a church cookbook. You poured it into green beans, poured it over rice, or mixed it into tuna noodles and called it dinner. Back then, it was under $1, always. Now, closer to $2, and that is if you are lucky. Some stores price it like it is homemade French bisque. You used to toss 3 or 4 into the cart without thinking. Now you scan the shelf and hope for a 2-for-1 deal. And it is not just mushroom, cream of chicken, celery, broccoli. They are all climbing like they forgot who they were feeding. For generations, these soups were budget stretchers. They glued together ingredients that had no business being called a meal. But now they are part of the problem. Casseroles just got more expensive. Off-brand cereal in the giant bag was the real trick. You got twice the volume of the name brand box for half the price, and the taste? Close enough. Whether it was Toasty Oats or Choco Boulders, it poured into the bowl just fine and drowned in milk like the expensive stuff. Now even the giant bags have doubled in price. Some are nearing $7 or $8, and they are still not resealable. It makes you pause. You are paying more, but getting the same stale corners and cardboard crunch if you do not finish it fast enough. Parents used to buy these by the armload. It fed kids for a week. It made mornings easy. But now cereal has become another aisle of sticker shock, and for people who relied on it as a no-fuss meal, that hits harder than spilled milk. It is not just corn and sugar anymore. It is economics in a plastic bag. Hot dogs in bulk packs were never glamorous, but they were survival food. A 10-pack could stretch across multiple meals, especially if you had buns or just bread. You boiled them, grilled them, nuked them. Kids ate them cold out of the fridge, and they used to be cheap, really cheap. Now even basic hot dogs have seen a price jump. Some packs are nearing $6, and the bigger family sizes do not save much anymore. And if you want anything fancier than the pink tube kind, be ready to fork over almost 10. Hot dogs were supposed to be recession-proof, that thing you could always afford. Toss a pack in the cart, dinner was done. Now they are joining bacon in the "is it worth it" category. For better or worse, even hot dogs are starting to feel like a treat. Frozen fish sticks were once a weeknight hack. You could feed the family, serve them with fries, and still come in under budget. The box was big, the sticks were crispy-ish, and no one asked what kind of fish it actually was. You dipped it in ketchup or tartar sauce and called it done. That box that used to cost $3? It is closer to $7 now. And the sticks are smaller, thinner, more breading, less fish. Even the bargain brands have gone up. And it is not like anyone thought frozen fish sticks were top-tier cuisine. They were there for the nights when you had no energy, no plan, and no money. But now, they are part of the inflation club. You still eat them, you still sort of enjoy them, but you cannot ignore the price anymore. Even fake fish got expensive. Powdered milk was never fun, but it was cheap. It sat in the pantry as a backup. A survival tool for cereal, baking, or when you ran out of the real thing. It was clumpy, weird, and had a strange aftertaste. But it worked. And it used to cost next to nothing. Now a box or canister of powdered milk can run $8, $9, sometimes $10. That is not a backup. That is a commitment. And for families that relied on it during lean times, that change is hard to swallow. It used to be a staple for emergencies. Now it is priced like protein powder. You would think something that tastes like chalk would at least stay affordable. But nope. Even powdered milk has joined the inflation parade. Store-brand American cheese singles were the cheapest cheese you could buy. Plastic-wrapped slices that melted like magic and turned any sandwich into comfort food. You used them on grilled cheese, cheeseburgers, or even scrambled eggs if you were in a mood. You used to get 20 slices for under $2. Now the same pack costs over $4 and feels thinner than ever. It tears when you peel it, it sweats when it is warm. But you still buy it because it makes the food feel like home. You stand in the aisle comparing slices, wondering if it is worth going generic again. Spoiler, even the generics are not cheap anymore. Cheese singles used to be filler food. Now they are another reason your grocery total feels like rent. Canned Vienna sausages were never about taste. They were about having something, anything, on the shelf when everything else was gone. They came in small cans, floating in mystery liquid, and were eaten with crackers, straight from the tin or sliced into beans or rice. Used to be 50 cents a can. Now they are well over $1 and shrinking. You open the can and wonder where the rest of them went. Vienna sausages were poor people food. Survival food. End of the month, no shame, full stomach food. Now they cost enough to make you hesitate. And that hesitation says everything. You do not buy them because they taste good. You buy them because they keep you fed. But even that small comfort now comes with sticker shock. Pinto beans by the pound were always the secret weapon. $1 could get you a bag that made a pot big enough to feed a family for days. You soaked them, seasoned them, and served them with rice, tortillas, or cornbread. Now that same bag is closer to $2 or even $3 in some stores. And the big bulk bags? Not much cheaper by comparison. Beans were supposed to be immune. They were humble, practical, honest food. Now they are quietly climbing up the price ladder. And when even dry beans start to feel expensive, it makes you nervous. Because beans were the plan when the plan failed. And if those cost too much, what is left? Jiffy Corn Muffin Mix was once the quiet hero of weeknight dinners. That little blue box with the cartoon corn never changed, and neither did its role. Cheap, easy, and guaranteed to bake into something that felt like comfort. For a while, you could grab a box for under 30 cents, and it would stretch into warm cornbread for the whole family. Add milk, add an egg, stir and bake. It did not get much simpler than that. Now, you pay nearly triple, and it is still the exact same box. The price just grew up without warning. You used to grab 5 boxes without thinking. Now you look at the shelf and wonder if you really need cornbread that bad. It still tastes good, still does the job. But there is something off about paying a premium for what once was a dollar-stretching staple. Families used to use it to bulk out chili nights, turn leftovers into something new, or just make breakfast a little special. It was part of that dependable aisle, the baking row where your cart stayed cheap. Not anymore. Jiffy Corn Muffin Mix is still around, still reliable, but these days it costs enough that you only buy 1 or 2. And every time you do, it kind of stings a little. Evaporated milk used to be a poor man's secret weapon. It sat right there next to the condensed stuff, in a small metal can with a price tag you barely noticed. You kept a few in the cupboard for emergencies, or baking, or when there was no fresh milk in the fridge and the store was too far or too expensive. Back then, a can cost less than a candy bar. Today, you might be better off just buying real milk. It was used in coffee, poured over cereal, and stirred into mashed potatoes, and somehow, it worked. You could stretch it with water or use it full strength when you needed extra creaminess. It was cheap comfort, quiet, overlooked, and always there when the fridge let you down. Now it sits on the shelf with a price tag that makes you double-check if you grabbed the wrong brand. That once cost less than 50 cents is flirting with $2 in some stores. It is not flashy, it is not trendy. But for people who grew up on it, evaporated milk still holds a place in the pantry and in the budget, even if it pinches now. Frozen mixed vegetables in a brick used to be the most unglamorous thing in the freezer. But it was cheap, it was useful, and it was everywhere. The vegetables were a single frozen block, pressed so tight you had to stab it with a fork to break it apart. Peas, carrots, corn, and green beans all stuck together like they were holding hands. You would steam them with a little butter and salt, throw them into casseroles, or stir them into rice and call it a meal. Back then, that little brick cost under $1, sometimes 50 cents. It was so cheap you never thought twice about tossing one in the cart. Now? That same block of vegetables is nearing $2 in some stores, and it is still the same vegetables, the same mushy texture, the same everything. You are paying more for something that never pretended to be fancy. No new packaging, no added flavor, just more expensive. Even the value brands have crept up to where you start asking if fresh produce is actually cheaper. It is the kind of price hike that sneaks up on you. One day you are stocking your freezer, the next you are standing there doing math over frozen peas. The brick used to be the back pocket side dish of every broke household. Now, it is another reminder that even the humblest foods are not immune. Margarine in a tub was the cheaper answer to butter, and for a long time it stayed in its lane. It spread easily, kept forever in the fridge, and came in tubs big enough to last all month. You could bake with it, fry eggs in it, melt it over vegetables, or slather it onto toast. Some people swore by it. Others just could not afford anything else. Either way, it got the job done. For years, you could get a whole tub for under $1. Now that same tub is pushing $3, and if you go for a buttery spread or something with olive oil, forget it. You are still getting oil and flavoring, but paying like it is whipped gold. The ingredients have not changed, but the price sure has. The basic brands that once saved you money are now neck and neck with store-brand butter, and that makes it harder to justify. For a while, margarine felt like a recession-proof staple, something you could count on in lean times. But today, it feels like you are being charged more for settling. It still lives in fridges across America, but now it comes with a side of frustration. When even margarine feels expensive, you start to wonder what cheap even means anymore. Off-brand soda in 2-liter bottles was the ultimate loophole. It tasted close enough, fizzed just fine, and cost a fraction of the name brands. For birthday parties, barbecues, and lunchroom trades, those big, bold-colored bottles were a lifesaver. Cola, orange, grape, take your pick. You could buy 4 for the price of 1 Coke and no one really complained. Now those same 2-liter off-brand sodas are over $1, sometimes close to $2. And the name brand versions? Practically luxury items. Suddenly generic is not so generic in price anymore. The shrinkflation is real too. Less fizz, smaller necks, faster staleness. And yet the price keeps rising, like we are all pretending these bottles were always worth that much. It used to be a safe grab at the checkout line. Toss in a bottle, no guilt, no stress. Now you catch yourself calculating how many cups you will actually get out of it. Off-brand soda, once made cheap, feel cheerful. Now it is just another product that forgot why people loved it in the first place. It still sits on the bottom shelf, but not quite as proudly. Day-old bread from the discount bin was the last line of defense for anyone trying to stretch $1. You could get a loaf for 25 cents, sometimes 2 for $1. It was dented, misshapen, maybe a little dry, but it was bread and it worked. Toast it, freeze it, make French toast and pretend it was intentional. Now, even the day-old rack is creeping up. $1.50, $2. For bread that has already been passed over once. Some stores have even gotten rid of it altogether. And that hits harder than it should. The bin used to be a quiet little corner of mercy. Now it feels like it is fading out. You could feed a family with the stuff nobody else wanted. It was a badge of thrift. A smart move, not a desperate one. But now the markdown shelf is starting to feel like a trick. And when old bread starts costing like new bread, you start to wonder, what is next? Canned fruit cocktail used to be a dessert shortcut. Pop the top, drain the syrup, or not, and pour it into a bowl. Cherries, pears, grapes, and those weird translucent cubes. Mystery fruit at its finest. It was sugary, cold, and went with anything. Kids loved it. Adults tolerated it. A can used to cost maybe 50 cents. Now, $1.50, $2, and they shrank the cherries. You know they did. And now there are light syrup and no sugar added versions that somehow cost more. Canned fruit was supposed to be the cheap side dish or dessert you grabbed without guilt. Now it is one more item you have to justify. You can still find it in school lunches and retirement homes. But even those institutions are starting to notice the squeeze. Fruit cocktail was never fancy. It was familiar, cheap, reliable. Now it tastes like inflation, with a hint of pear. Bananas were the one fresh produce item you could always afford. They were practically a symbol of budget eating. 5 or 6 for $1, easy. Slice them on cereal, mash them into bread, eat them straight out of the peel. It was a snack, a breakfast, a lunchbox filler, all in one. Now bananas are inching towards 60, 70, even 80 cents a pound in some stores. And the quality? Hit or miss. You pay more for bruises, smaller bunches, and faster spoilage. The cheap fruit is quietly becoming not so cheap. And yet, it still feels like the safest option. Because compared to everything else, bananas are the least bad surprise. But that is the problem, right? We are measuring groceries by least bad now. Bananas are still a staple, but the prices are enough to make you nostalgic for a time when fruit felt generous. You used to grab a whole bunch without checking the sticker. Now you weigh them in your hand like gold. Oranges were once an affordable treat, a whole bag for a few bucks, bright, juicy, and sweet enough to feel like dessert. You packed them in lunches, sliced them for soccer games, and juiced them on weekend mornings. These days, a single orange can cost over $1. A bag, closer to $7. And the bags are lighter than they used to be. More air, less fruit. Even navel oranges feel like a splurge now. And you start questioning if you really need vitamin C that bad. For decades, oranges were considered the everyman's citrus. Not exotic, not trendy, just reliable. Now they are bordering on fancy, something you eye but maybe skip. It is wild to think that fruit your grandparents picked off trees is now priced like it came from another planet. Oranges have not changed, but our wallets sure have. Government cheese, now sold as processed loaf, was never glamorous, but it got the job done. It came in massive orange bricks, often handed out at food pantries or through government assistance programs. Melty, salty, and oddly delicious, it was survival cheese with a cult following. People fried it, grated it, sliced it thick for sandwiches. It stretched far, and it was free for many families. Now that same type of cheese is sold in stores as processed loaf or deluxe melt, and it is surprisingly expensive. $5, $6, sometimes more. You are paying for nostalgia and a product that was once a necessity. It is still dense, still melts into gold, but it is no longer humble. It has been rebranded as retro or comfort food, and that feels strange. This was cheese you used when you had no other options. Cheese you grew up on, whether you wanted to or not. Now it is on shelves like it is a gourmet find, and some of us are still buying it because it reminds us of home. Funny how poverty food can come back as premium. These were not your little brother's bricks. The Lego Expert Builder series, before it became Technic, was for the serious kids, the ones who had toolboxes, blueprints, and an attention span longer than 10 minutes. But here's the thing. These kits were expensive, and rich kids got them for birthdays or holidays with barely a blink. You saw them crack open the box, spread out all those tiny gears and rods, and start building like it was their job. The box said, ages 9 and up, but it might as well have said, you cannot afford this. It was more than just Lego. It was mechanical. Pistons, axles, moving parts. You could build a car and then actually steer it. For a lot of us, that was like holding an engine from the future. You could hear the click of gears and feel the snap of every piece sliding perfectly into place. These sets were not just about building. They were about control, precision, pride. And every time you saw one finished, you wondered what it felt like to be trusted with something so complex. Most kids never touched these. They were locked behind price tags and parent logic that said, you will lose the pieces. Maybe they were right. But it still stung when your friend came to school bragging about building a V8 engine out of Lego. Economy tea bags were the warm drink that felt like a small luxury. You could buy a box of 100 for a couple of bucks, and they would last through cold seasons and quiet evenings. You dunked them in hot water, let them steep, and drank it plain or with a little sugar if you had it. Sometimes you used the same bag twice, sometimes more. It was light, a little bitter, and deeply calming. Tea was not about caffeine, it was about comfort. The paper tags always tore off, so you fished the string out with a spoon. You held the mug in both hands like it could warm more than just your fingers. Even if it was lukewarm, it gave you a reason to slow down. You drank it at the table, on the couch, or leaning against the counter while the house was still. It was not about the tea. It was about the quiet that came with it. You drank it when you were sick, when you were tired, or when there was nothing else. The bag would float at the top, and you knew not to squeeze it too much or it would get bitter. Economy tea bags gave the day a sense of pause, even when everything else felt rushed. The dairy farm drive-thru felt like something out of a storybook. You did not get out of the car. You just rolled forward slowly on a gravel path that crunched under the tires like popcorn, while the smell of hay and cream filled the air. Wooden signs pointed the way. Milk, cream, eggs, and sometimes fresh butter today. Dad would pull up to the window, nod at the farmhand, and exchange a couple of glass bottles like they were precious cargo. You could hear them clinking together softly in the metal crate behind the seat, already cold with condensation. If you had been on your best behavior, meaning no backseat bickering and no complaints during the wait, he would ask the real question, "You want a cone?" It was always a yes. The scoop was big, the cone was soggy by the time you were halfway through, and somehow it still tasted like heaven. Sometimes Dad would get one too and say, "Best $2 I ever spent." And as the cows in the distance mooed lazily and the sun painted gold across the field, you realized simple things could feel grand. But if you think that was charming, just wait until you step inside the used bookstore that sold both dusty novels and ham radios whispering from across the country. W.T. Grant was not just a department store, it was a part of the American landscape. In the 1970s, it had over 1,000 locations. Main streets, suburban malls, strip centers. W.T. Grant was everywhere. It sold clothes, appliances, hardware, school supplies. You could buy a pair of jeans, a toaster, and a lawn chair in one trip. But behind the counters, trouble brewed. Management wanted growth, and they wanted it fast. Stores were built too quickly. Debt piled up. And worst of all, they handed out credit like candy. Their revolving charge account let customers buy now, pay later, with no real system to check if they could afford it. The trust they gave customers was generous, but fatally blind. W.T. Grant did not just run out of money, it ran out of time. The losses mounted. In 1976, W.T. Grant filed for bankruptcy. It was one of the largest retail collapses in American history. Thousands of workers lost jobs, communities lost familiar storefronts, and shoppers lost a place that felt like home. Unlike other stores that faded quietly, Grant's collapse was loud, public, and painful. It was a warning shot across the bow of American retail. Grow too fast, trust too much, and the walls will fall. People still remember the logo, the way the floors creaked, the smell of new shoes in a cardboard box. But the store itself is gone. Asbestos ceiling tiles and insulation were practically a design trend in the 1970s. You saw those popcorn ceilings and fuzzy-looking pipe wrappings in homes, schools, offices, everywhere. Nobody warned you not to touch it. Nobody wore masks when cutting into it. In fact, it was marketed as a safety feature, fire-resistant, soundproof, and easy to install. It was the miracle material that builders swore by, and people loved how quiet it made things. Kids sat through classes under ceilings full of it. Parents hung out in basements lined with it. But what no one knew, or chose to ignore, was how the fibers could break loose, float into your lungs, and stay there forever. Asbestos exposure doesn't cause immediate symptoms. It creeps in years later, showing up as mesothelioma or lung disease long after the danger is gone. Once science caught up, the lawsuits started. Suddenly, that fluffy insulation was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Contractors had to wear hazmat suits just to remove it, and homeowners were left wondering how many years they had breathed it in. Today, it's banned in most uses and strictly regulated in others. But back then, it was part of the wallpaper of life. And if the walls and ceilings weren't enough, your first aid kit might have been just as questionable. Leisure World was not just a retirement community, it was a promise, a dream built on sunshine, shuffleboard, and stress-free living. Born in the 1970s, Leisure World offered gated bliss for seniors, condos, golf carts, social clubs, and security. It was pitched as paradise for the golden years. But paradise costs money. And by the 1980s, cracks started to show. Economic downturns hit retirement savings hard. Fixed incomes did not match rising maintenance fees. And some residents found that the dream came with hidden rules, strict covenants, and unexpected costs. The promise of simplicity turned into a maze of fine print. For many residents, retirement began to feel like a contract they never meant to sign. Lawsuits followed, disputes over control, access, and promises made but not kept. What began as a utopia turned, in many places, into something colder. Today, some Leisure World communities still exist, but the shine is gone. The brochures have aged. The palm trees are the same, but the illusion has faded. For many, it is still home. But for others, It was a broken promise wrapped in sunshine. A reminder that even dreams built in good faith can crack under real pressure. Before smartwatches, before touchscreens, there was a time when telling time with glowing red numbers made you feel like you had stepped into the future. Digital LED watches were sleek, sharp, and expensive. They lit up with a single button press. No ticking, no hands, just pure digital magic. Rich kids wore them like they were secret agents. They would check the time in class with a smug little tap, and that red glow would flash just long enough for everyone around them to notice. The rest of us had to deal with plastic analog watches or whatever our parents found at the drugstore. These LED watches cost real money. The early models were made of stainless steel, with brushed metal finishes that looked more like something your dad would wear to a business meeting. But if you were one of the lucky few who had one, you were immediately cooler. You were tech-savvy, you were sharp, and you were ahead of the curve. Even the act of telling time became a performance. Tap the button, glance, and lower your wrist like you had just launched a satellite. It was not really about knowing what time it was. It was about showing that you could. Canned corned beef hash was salty, soft, and a little strange, but it fed you well. You cracked the lid, heard the suction break, and slid out a solid block of meat and potatoes. It looked like dog food and smelled like breakfast, and somehow it worked. You'd fry it in a skillet until it crisped on the edges and serve it with eggs, if you had eggs. If not, it stood on its own, greasy and rich and completely satisfying. There was no guessing what was in it. You just trusted that it was meat and starch and enough to hold you till dinner. You flipped it carefully so it didn't fall apart. Sometimes it stuck to the pan and you scraped it up anyway. It hissed in the skillet and filled the house with the kind of smell that said, "There's food on the stove." Leftovers went into sandwiches, folded into omelets, or straight into a bowl with ketchup. It was versatile because it had to be, and filling because it needed to be. You might not have liked how it looked, but you never argued with how it made you feel. Some people added onions or ketchup, others just let it sizzle. It tasted better than it looked. And on mornings when the cupboard was close to empty, corned beef hash reminded you that a can opener and a hot pan could still mean a good meal. In the 1970s, it was one of the cheapest ways to feel like you were eating something hearty, and it stuck with you. Baking soda in bulk boxes was not just for baking. It sat in the fridge to keep things fresh, under the sink for cleaning, and on the shelf in case a recipe called for it. You used it in biscuits, in pancakes, and in cookies when you got lucky enough to bake. A spoonful could lift a batter or scrub a sink. It never expired, never spoiled, and never let you down. The box was always just a little dusty, with the cardboard flap bent back from years of use. You tapped it into your hand because the opening never worked right. It fizzed when you added vinegar, and somehow that always felt like magic. You poured it down drains, into shoes, and over stovetops without thinking twice. There was always a box open somewhere in the house, half used but still useful. It was invisible help, quiet, cheap, and always ready. It was the kind of item that did not get talked about, but got used constantly. You bought it once and forgot about it, until you needed it again. In the 1970s, baking soda was the cheapest multi-tool in the kitchen. The camera and film shop was a cathedral of forgotten technology. You walked in, and the air smelled like chemicals and time. Behind the counter, rows of yellow Kodak envelopes waited like tiny mysteries. Dad would head straight for the slide carousel projectors, lifting one like it was a sacred artifact. "Kodachrome," he would whisper. "They just don't make colors like that anymore." You did not know what he meant, but you believed it. You spun the projector just to hear the satisfying click, click, click of slides falling into place. There were shelves of lenses, tripods, flash bulbs in boxes older than you, and glass cases of second-hand cameras that looked more like museum pieces. Dad talked shop with the clerk, dropping words like aperture and ISO like he was reading from scripture. You picked up a Polaroid and tried to figure out how it worked. The clerk let you snap one. The photo came out blurry, overexposed, but it still felt like magic. Dad bought a roll of film, maybe 2, even though he already had 6 at home. Just in case, he would say, just in case the light hit right. And on the drive home, with the bag of film in his lap, he would say, "One quick stop." That stop? A smoky little pool hall where you got a taste of grown-up cool, even if just for one night. Leisure World was not just a retirement community. It was a promise, a dream built on sunshine, shuffleboard, and stress-free living. Born in the 1970s, Leisure World offered gated bliss for seniors, condos, golf carts, social clubs, and security. It was pitched as paradise for the golden years. But paradise costs money. And by the 1980s, cracks started to show. Economic downturns hit retirement savings hard. Fixed incomes did not match rising maintenance fees. And some residents found that the dream came with hidden rules, strict covenants, and unexpected costs. The promise of simplicity turned into a maze of fine print. For many residents, retirement began to feel like a contract they never meant to sign. Lawsuits followed, disputes over control, access, and promises made but not kept. What began as a utopia turned, in many places, into something colder. Today, some Leisure World communities still exist, but the shine is gone. The brochures have aged. The palm trees are the same, but the illusion has faded. For many, it is still home. But for others, it was a broken promise wrapped in sunshine. A reminder that even dreams built in good faith can crack under real pressure. There was a moment in time when Betamax by Sony felt like the future. It had better video quality, a sleeker build, and came from a company America respected. But the future is not always decided by quality. It is decided by marketing, accessibility, and sometimes dumb luck. As families across the United States tried to tape late-night movies and birthday parties, VHS was waiting in the wings with longer record times and cheaper manufacturing. Sony clung to Betamax like it was a crown jewel, refusing to open the format to other producers. Meanwhile, JVC made sure VHS was everywhere. Department stores, rental shops, even those weird catalogs your uncle subscribed to. Betamax became the expensive outsider, and slowly, painfully, it vanished. What makes it worse is how many people swore it was better. You hear it even now, that Betamax was sharper, that it deserved to win, but it did not. And the shelves emptied and the VCRs were unplugged. We talk a lot about technology moving too fast, but this was a case of the better tech losing the race. People did not just throw out a tape, they threw out a bet on something they believed in. That loss still stings for those who remember. It was the kind of thing that made you feel like you were in your own movie. The Sony Walkman, shiny, sleek, with its padded headphones and silver buttons, was a full-blown experience. Rich kids in the late 1970s had these strapped to their belts like they were carrying a portal to another world. Everyone else was stuck with boomboxes too big to carry or cassette players that needed 4D batteries. The Walkman changed everything. Suddenly, you could walk down the street with music just for you. You did not have to share it. You could press play, slide on those foam-covered headphones, and disappear. But only if your parents had the cash. These were not cheap. Getting one meant someone dropped real money to let you tune out the world. And that mattered. The kid with the Walkman had their own rhythm, their own world, and a volume knob that said, "I do not need to hear you right now." It turned ordinary walks into music videos, and for those without one, silence suddenly felt louder. The Walkman made you cool without saying a word. It turned bus rides, grocery store trips, and lonely afternoons into something cinematic. You felt behind if you did not have one. Like everyone else had the soundtrack to growing up, and you were just stuck in silence. Saltine crackers were never the star, but they were always in the picture. The box lasted forever and the sleeves got stale faster than you could finish them, but you kept them anyway. They were there when the bread ran out, there when you were sick, there when dinner needed a filler. You spread peanut butter, dipped them in soup, crumbled them into meatloaf. Dry and plain and dusty on your tongue, but still, somehow, comforting. You lined them up on a plate like a snack tray when there was nothing else to serve. They broke easily in your hand but never let you down in a recipe. Sometimes they were the only side dish on the table. You crunched them late at night when the house was quiet and your stomach was not. No one ever thanked them, but no one ever threw them out either. They lived at the back of every pantry like a safety net made of salt and starch. You wrapped them in napkins and tucked them in lunchboxes like they were gold. Sometimes dinner was just a few saltines and whatever you could scrounge. They held everything together, even when everything felt like it was falling apart. Saltines were not fancy. They were just always there. The go-kart track with zero safety rules looked like it was built by someone who once saw a racetrack in a dream and then tried to recreate it with duct tape and a prayer. The sign out front read, "Family Fun." But you knew this was Dad's kind of fun. He paid cash to a man with a sunburn and a clipboard, and before you knew it, you were strapping into a plastic rocket with wheels. No seatbelt, no helmet, just a stern warning. Do not hit your sister. Dad, of course, was already in his own cart, revving the engine like it was the Daytona 500. The track was a cracked loop with grass growing through it and tires stacked too high as a boundary. The exhaust fumes were strong enough to water your eyes, and the cart screeched like a choir of angry lawnmowers. You skidded, bumped, and spun out more than once, but you never forgot the thrill. Especially when Dad passed you on the last lap, one hand on the wheel, the other waving smugly. That victory lap? It lasted all week, and if you were lucky, he would let you stay just a little longer, because the community swap meet down at the church lot was about to open, and Dad never missed that one. The Pontiac Aztec was a disaster in the early 2000s, but its roots stretch back to the 1970s. Back then, car designers were quietly sketching new ideas, crossovers, hybrid shapes, something between a van and an SUV. The oil crisis had made the auto industry rethink everything. What if utility and economy could live in the same shell? Those early concepts never left the drawing board, but they stayed in the shadows, mutating over time. Somewhere between vision and reality, the design lost its soul. What rolled out of the factory felt more like compromise than innovation. And when the market finally seemed ready for something different, Pontiac pulled the trigger. What came out was the Aztec. It was bold. It was weird. It was ahead of its time, and somehow behind it. The angles were wrong. The plastic cladding was cheap, and the name sounded like a dare. Consumers recoiled, sales tanked, and Pontiac, already in trouble, never really recovered. But behind the jokes, behind the Breaking Bad memes and design flops, there was something sad about it all. The Aztec was born from good intentions, from a desire to break the mold and recapture relevance. Instead, it became a punchline. Proof that even bold ideas, especially bold ideas, can fail spectacularly. Burger Chef once had more locations than McDonald's. That is the part people forget. Before the Golden Arches took over every highway exit and downtown corner, Burger Chef was America's fast food sweetheart. Its secret? The Fun Meal, a direct precursor to the Happy Meal. It gave kids toys, games, and branded packaging years before anyone else did. The burgers were solid, the prices were right, and families loved it. But then came the lawsuits, the missteps, the slow bleed of bad business decisions. Hardee's bought them out, closed down locations, and erased the name almost overnight. Some buildings stayed standing for years, sun-faded signs above cracked pavement. You would drive past them and remember the taste, the toy, the tray that made you feel like the meal was yours. What happened to Burger Chef was not just corporate takeover, it was theft by attrition, a slow-motion forgetting of something that once mattered. Ask anyone over 50 if they remember it, and their eyes light up. But there are no new stories being made. No drive-thrus, no jingles, no future, just memories. And that, for a brand that once brought so much joy, feels like a tragedy no one saw coming. They were not the most famous toys of the 1970s, but they were some of the most advanced. Micronauts were these incredibly detailed, posable action figures with interchangeable parts and tiny accessories that made you feel like you were handling alien tech. They were made in Japan and imported to the United States, which meant two things. They were cool and they were not cheap. Rich kids had full collections: figures, vehicles, playsets. You could build and rebuild them into whatever you wanted, and they looked nothing like the chunky toys most kids had. These were lean, mechanical, sharp-edged. The joints clicked in a way that felt like engineering. Owning them felt grown up. For everyone else, Micronauts were something you saw in catalogs or behind the counter at fancy toy stores. You did not just stumble across them. You needed someone to drive you to the one place in town that sold them, and even then, you were probably just looking. The kid who had a full Micronaut set was not just lucky. They were living in a different league. These were not toys that got thrown in a bin. They were displayed, shown off, guarded like museum pieces. You did not ask to play with them. You asked to watch. He never bought a thing, and we never needed a thing, but the appliance store on Route 17, that was a showroom of dreams. The moment you stepped inside, it was like the future had been laid out under fluorescent lights. Fridges the size of Cadillacs, dishwashers that promised miracles, and those clunky microwaves that looked like they could launch satellites. Dad would do the full lap, hands in pockets, nodding like he understood the specs. "Now this here's got dual defrost," he would say, which meant absolutely nothing to any of us. Meanwhile, you were just there for one thing: the donut samples. Right by the scratch and dent section, on a little fold-out table with a paper plate and toothpicks stabbed into sugar-dusted treasures. If you got lucky, there might even be coffee, lukewarm, but still free. Sometimes a salesman would corner Dad, and he would nod solemnly, asking questions like he was running a restaurant and not just trying to keep the toaster alive for another year. It was never about buying. It was about imagining. About standing in front of a top-of-the-line freezer and picturing your name on the deed to a better life. But when it came to good times and cheap thrills, nothing froze time quite like the local bowling alley. Olympia beer was not flashy. It was not exotic. It was the working man's brew. Born in Washington State and famous for its "It is the water" slogan, Olympia carved out a loyal base across the Pacific Northwest. It tasted like fishing trips, union picnics, and back porch summers. You did not drink it to impress anyone. You drank it because it was yours. But the beer wars were brutal. Big national brands like Budweiser and Miller came swinging with huge ad budgets and coast-to-coast reach. Olympia tried to expand, but its regional charm did not scale well. The further it traveled from the rivers and forests of its home, the more it lost its soul. What made it special could not be bottled and shipped across state lines. It was bought out, reformulated, stripped of its identity. By the 1980s, the writing was on the wall. The original brewery closed, the taste changed, and loyal drinkers quietly moved on. Today, Olympia still exists in name, brewed by a different company in a different place. But those who remember the real thing will tell you, it is not the same. And maybe it never could be. In the 1970s, Vivitar cameras were everywhere. They were not the fanciest, but they worked. They captured birthday parties, backyard barbecues, and road trips to Mount Rushmore. They were affordable, sturdy, and proudly American. For amateur photographers, Vivitar was a ticket to creativity. But behind the shutters and flashbulbs, the world was changing. Japan was coming fast with brands like Nikon, Canon, and Minolta. Their lenses were sharper, their designs sleeker, and their technology more advanced. Vivitar could not keep up. It tried to pivot, offering accessories, licensing deals, and budget versions of premium cameras. Every shelf they lost in a department store was one less memory they would help capture. They were not just losing market share, they were losing their place in the family album. But the market was ruthless. Film was expensive, competition was brutal, and Vivitar slowly fell out of focus. By the time digital cameras arrived, it was too late. What once filled shelves at Sears and Montgomery Ward now sat in garage sales and thrift stores. Forgotten. But ask anyone who grew up in the 1970s to show you their old photo albums. Odds are, a Vivitar helped make those memories. A camera might just be a tool, but for millions of Americans, Vivitar was how they remembered their lives. Oldsmobile was the brand your grandfather trusted. It was dependable, steady, and proudly American. In the 1970s, it was one of General Motors' most successful lines. The Cutlass was everywhere. Parking lots, driveways, high school graduation gifts. It was a badge of middle-class confidence. But times changed. Japanese automakers brought new efficiency. The luxury market moved to BMW and Mercedes-Benz, and Oldsmobile struggled to define itself. Was it sporty? Was it classic? Was it for young drivers or retirees? The answers never came. Designs grew stale. Performance lagged. The name Oldsmobile started to feel like a joke no one wanted to explain. By the time they rebranded, no one was listening, and the name started to sound old. By the 1990s, Oldsmobile felt like a brand out of time. Sales dropped. Dealers lost faith. General Motors tried to rebrand it, update it, give it a new face. But it was too late. The final Oldsmobile rolled off the line in 2004. For decades, it was the quiet heart of the American road. And then it was gone. Not with a crash, but with a sigh. A slow fade into silence. And if you ever drove one, you remember. The smell of the vinyl seats, the hum of the engine on a long drive. Oldsmobile did not just fail, it retired. If seeing these old cheap groceries now priced like gold hit a nerve, drop a memory in the comments. Tap like if your cart used to be full for $20, and subscribe so you do not miss the next trip through the aisles of yesterday.